Thank you, Frida, for that introduction and for putting into the context the framework within which all of us are going to really speak and give our perspectives. I hope all of you can hear me, given, is that okay? Is it clear enough? On behalf of the Asian Development Bank, I'd like to really thank the International Trade Center for this opportunity to discuss recent developments in trade financing between emerging markets and the Asian Development Bank's activities in this area. I think it's very relevant to what we're going to discuss later in the panel discussion. Well, we all know that trade is extremely important in promoting economic growth, building links for low-income countries in particular, building links to international markets for exports, imports, and capital play a very important role for economic expansion and achieving inclusive growth. Trade also provides access to modern technology, know-how, innovation, and new ideas. It's a strong source of competition for improving efficiency and productivity. Finally, trade has helped to power rapid development in numerous countries, and Asia abounds with examples. Yet global trade today is also facing strong headwinds. Our region is also being particularly hit as China and India face growth slowdowns for different reasons, though. Nonetheless, we do expect GDP growth in developing Asia to remain somewhat strong in relative terms at 6.1% this year, before rising next year to 6.7%. This is according to the latest Asian Development Outlook. This has to be also seen from the perspective of a recent World Bank estimate, which shows that the collapse of trade financing contributed to a 15% decline in world trade during the recent global recession. But, ladies and gentlemen, a structural shift is occurring as demand for goods and services from traditional markets in advanced economies eases in the current economic environment. As international production networks and supply chains expand, deepen, and grow more complex, we have seen intra-regional trade in intermediate goods grow quite rapidly. Most of this trade is between emerging markets. Inter-regional trade, for example, between Asia and Latin America is also expanding, as is South-South trade in general. The availability of reliable trade services plays a vital role in trade-driven economic growth and poverty alleviation. These include trade finance and supply chain finance. There is a high demand for these services, yet the private sector seems unable to meet this demand alone. Given their importance to economic expansion, sustainable growth, and poverty reduction, the Asian Development Bank has established a highly successful trade finance program. We plan to complement this initiative by establishing a supply chain finance by the end of this year. ADB's trade finance program, or TFP as we call it, fills market gaps for trade finance that currently exists in developing Asia by providing guarantees and loans within 24 hours by working closely with 200 partner banks. The TFP focuses on the more challenging markets where market gaps for trade finance are proportionally the largest. Our TFP results so far, and especially since we expanded the scope from 2009 onwards, has been quite impressive, underlying the persistent market gap that we are seeking to fill. It has supported over $3.5 billion in trade in 2011 alone. It conducted over 1,500 transactions in 2011, and of those transactions, over 40% backed trade between Asia's emerging markets. In addition to this intra-regional emerging market trade, The TFP last year supported more than 660 small and medium enterprises or SMEs. In the first 6 months of 2012, TFP volumes were over 40% higher compared to the first 6 months of 2011, and we anticipate supporting over $4 billion in trade in this year. Keeping up with the demand for TFP support is a very big challenge. One of the ways the program has managed to maximize support to emerging markets against its finite capital resources is by drawing the private sector and other partners into what we call risk-sharing agreements. For example, the TFP drew in $2.4 billion in co-financing from mostly private partners in 2011, and we expect that to rise as we go along. In addition to leveraging available ADB resources, risk-sharing with private sector has brought in partners such as the Swiss Re Insurance Company and private sector banks into new markets. One reason we see gaps in availability of trade finance and increasing demand for our TFP as a consequence is the tougher regulatory requirements for financing trade. To demonstrate that trade finance should be treated as a unique asset class for regulatory purposes, we proposed the creation of a trade finance default register to the International Chamber of Commerce, which ADB funded and subsequently implemented. The results of this exercise, which for the first time collected transaction data industry-wide, showed a remarkably low 0.02% default probability on a data set of over 5 million trade finance transactions going back 5 years, which also included the period of the global financial crisis. ADB's TFP and the International Chamber of Commerce presented this to the Basel Committee to substantiate our argument that trade finance should be treated appropriately in line with this risk profile. We strongly feel that in today's environment of increasing deleveraging, tighter regulation on relatively safe forms of financing, such as trade finance, impedes economic growth and job creation. As a result, in October 2011, Basel offered some concessions for trade finance, but we believe that these do not go far enough. We will continue to work with the International Chamber of Commerce to broaden and deepen our evidence that trade finance is relatively low risk. But we also simultaneously need to work with the private sector and encourage them to accept risk even in more challenging markets. As a knowledge bank, and in an effort to ensure that our lessons learned through our TFP is disseminated to other regions, we have been working closely with the African Development Bank in establishing an African Trade Finance Program. And in Latin America, we have an agreement with the Trade Finance Program of the Inter-American Development Bank to support trade between Asia and Latin America. ADB is now working to establish a supply chain finance program, which we expect to roll out by the end of this year or early next year. We're excited about this new program as it can provide financing to SMEs that are traditionally considered, quote unquote, not bankable. Rather than traditional risk assessments focused on financials and collateral, supply chain finance focuses on the strength of the supply chain. Thus, we can promote infusion of working capital to expand business and help to create growth and jobs. SMEs are critical in deepening domestic demand as well and form an integral part of the rebalancing of the sources of economic growth, which have now come to assume so much importance in Asia, as also in other parts of the world, such as Africa and Latin America. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let me in closing say that in a world that is increasingly characterized by anemic economic growth and low job creation, it's more important than ever to ensure public and private partnerships that narrow trade finance gaps to sustain growth in trade and to create jobs within and among new and exciting emerging markets. I'm sure the discussion that will follow, as also the discussion with the audience, will bring us many new ideas that we can work upon as we go forward. And I'd like to thank the organizers of this forum for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on our trade finance program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lakshmi.